Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special night here at Online Prep Live with the ACT and Kaplan Test Prep. My name is Arthur. It is our pleasure to be with you all this evening. Go ahead and say hi in the chat or just let us know if you have any questions. You can post questions that you might have on the right side of your screen there. I know many of you have already taken advantage of that. Feel free to say hello, not just to myself, but to our wonderful team of Kaplan ACT instructors this evening. We've got Greg, we've got Beth, Joe, Crystal, and Robert all standing by. If you do have any questions, please post them into the chat that you see on the right side of your screen. Good evening. Welcome to this special night at Online Prep Live, as we are going to go through a little bit of what we call sort of like a preview or a sample of the kind of teaching that you can expect from the Online Prep Live program. Maybe some of your friends, some maybe family members, if you have like brothers, sisters, cousins, whoever it might be, might already have heard of this program. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. So over the next 75 minutes or so, we're going to talk about what the ACT is, how to help you get to your desired ACT score, whether it is as high as a 36. I think I saw a couple folks mention that earlier, like, if I already got a 36, should I be, well, if you already got a perfect score in the ACT, well, you know what? You're more than welcome to stick around. You're more than welcome to hang out with us and have some fun. But I think the majority of us, we're here because we want to do well on the ACT. We want to do better on the ACT than we did maybe the last time we took it. Or maybe we haven't taken the ACT yet. We're like, all right, I know this is an important exam. I know this is an exam that I need to take in order to get into my dream college, or the college I'm really looking to get into, whether it's next fall or the following fall, whatever it might be. So please, over the next 75 minutes, we're going to have a very interactive lesson. So we're going to go through some of the sample teaching that we do at Online Prep Live with the ACT and Kaplan Test Prep. So you'll get a little bit idea of how the exam is, the format, the structure of the structure of the test, and all those things. So if you take a look, what we've got here lined up on our agenda today, so that these are what we call learning objectives. So that over the next 75 minutes, we're going to take a look at each of the sections, or what the ACT calls the different ACT tests. So for instance, the ACT English test, and looking at conventions of standard English, then looking at a couple sample questions from the ACT math test that are about basic algebra and geometry rules, followed by looking at how to answer some of those questions that are about reading passages on the ACT reading test. Then we're going to take a look at the types of questions that you can expect to see on the ACT science test. So the ACT exam is basically these 4 tests. You may also know that there is a 5th test called the ACT writing test, basically an essay. That is an optional part of the exam. We won't specifically cover that tonight, but it is optional. Some people choose not to do not to take the ACT writing test, but we'll look at all 4 of these components that are required from the ACT exam. And then lastly, just talk a little bit about what ACT Kaplan's Online Prep Live program is. So with that in mind, let's look at the ACT. And what we're going to start off with is looking at the ACT English test. What is the ACT English test all about? Well, a couple things to know. One, it's always the first test. So when you get in there, when you get into the testing room, when you're sitting there on test day, the first section you have is the English test. And you'll notice it is 45 minutes long, consisting of 75 questions distributed over 5 passages. So give me your honest reactions, and let's keep it clean, let's keep it fair, let's keep it nice. But your honest reactions when you see 45 minutes long, 75 questions. Yo, what the heck? That seems like not a lot of time. I imagine that's probably what most of you are thinking right now. Not a lot of time for 75 questions distributed, 45 minutes, 75 questions, 5 passages. If we break down those numbers a little bit further, here's what you want to remember in terms of how you're prepping for the ACT English test. It means you've got 9 minutes to spend on each passage. Each passage has 15 questions. 9 minutes to spend on each passage, and it's 15 questions. So as you can see, accuracy and speed are key. This test would be a lot easier. Let's be honest here. This test would be a lot easier if they gave you that booklet and said, here you go, here's the ACT, bring it back tomorrow. Of course, it'd be so much easier. One of the big things in terms of your getting a great score is for you to understand how the ACT is not just about knowing random rules, knowing random grammar rules and things like that, but really about understanding the format, understanding the different concepts, understanding the most important concepts to lead you to success. Because the ACT, remember, is all about time management. Okay, it's about problem solving. So I love some of the comments I'm getting here. Luke, Jolie, all saying like, oh, not enough time, feels tough, feels like it was hard the first time you took it. So here with a little bit of confidence here, maybe this is a strength of yours, right? But we can get that time down even better because it's not just enough to obviously to answer the questions quickly. You want to make sure that you're answering as many of them correctly as well. So the ACT English test contains passages on a variety of topics, all in different varieties of styles. You get passages that are a little bit more informal, like first-person narratives and things like that. Then you get your ACT passages that are about setting up an argument or making a specific point, like we are convinced of this, and trying to make an argument. Some ACT passages are a little bit more just general, like I'm going to tell you some information about this type of species of bird or whatever it might be, right? So no matter what the different style is, your strategy stays the same, regardless of the topic, regardless of the style, okay? So some questions, and we'll see a couple of these examples here, some questions will have an underlined portion in the sentence. And then your job is to see, is there something wrong with the underlined portion? And if there is something wrong, how do you fix it? There are some questions on the ACT English test that are about an entire section of a passage, or maybe like an entire paragraph, and saying, okay, does this paragraph make sense here? Does this sentence within this paragraph make sense here? Okay? So those are the two basic ways that the question formats are on the ACT English test. Okay? So the ACT, when you see the English test, will basically include three reporting categories: conventions of standard English, knowledge of writing, knowledge of language, and production of writing. So these are the three different categories basically on the English test. Conventions of standard English is probably one of the more, it's the one that people feel that they can gain a lot of points quickly, as long as you remember some basic grammar rules. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at a sample of what to expect in our ACT Kaplan Online Prep Live program, because in our Online Prep Live program, we've got lessons about every single category, every single type of question to expect. Let's take a look at one of those topics. And under the category of conventions of standard English, we see a big topic about commas. And commas, I don't know about you guys, but I remember I had an elementary school teacher once said, yeah, when in doubt, more commas is better than not enough. More commas is better than not enough. That's what one of my elementary school teachers told me way back in the day. And I'm like, and I remember that advice until I got to high school, when I kept getting like these, when my English teachers be like, why do you write like this? I'm like, I don't know, there's supposed to be commas there, right? For the purpose, certainly of the ACT, and for the purpose of just good standard writing. Remember that commas are used in specific cases. One of them, when you are separating elements in a series, right? Or if you're modifying elements. So one example you see here. My most interesting classes this year, what are they? Physics, comma, calculus, comma, and US history, okay? Those of you who are a little bit more sharper on the grammar, you might know this term called the Oxford comma. There's maybe a little bit of love out there for the Oxford comma. So on the ACT, yes, you will need to use that Oxford comma to separate out the different things that are being listed. So when you have a bunch of things listed out, make sure each of those things has a comma. Okay. Another way to use a comma is when you have a coordinating conjunction to separate these independent clauses within a sentence. So as an example, I work on Mondays, comma, and I have soccer practice on Tuesdays, okay? You have the comma and some sort of conjunction there, right? I don't know if you guys remember, this is a little bit old school, but maybe some of you guys have heard of conjunction junction, what's your function? It's this little schoolhouse rock song from, it was really popular back in the 80s, I think. But I've heard actually some of my own students in online prep have said that they know about this as well. So if you have some sort of a conjunction word after a comma to join these two independent clauses, right? I work on Mondays. I have soccer practice on Tuesdays. These are individual, independent clauses. You can connect them with a comma and the word and. I'm loving those comments I saw a little bit earlier about loving the Oxford comma. Liza, you know what I'm talking about, Liza, right? The conjunction junction song. That's awesome. All right. Another way to use commas is when you have parenthetical or non-essential phrases and clauses. So in this example here, you'll notice that this middle phrase technically doesn't need to be there, right? Like if this phrase wasn't here, this would still be a sentence on its own. Azara found that the hours she spent studying were worth the effort, right? That would be fine on its own. But if you want to include some sort of extra information, right, something to add emphasis, Azara found, comma, much to her delight, comma, that the hours she spent studying were worth the effort. So if you have some sort of middle phrase, some non-essential phrase, but something just to add information, put a comma before the phrase, put a comma after the phrase. Okay? And then lastly, use a comma to set off some sort of introduction or modifying phrase. So notice here, after school, comma, and then wait, what? What happened after school? Or what's this thing that you're referring to after school? After school, Mindy has to go straight to band practice. Right, so you see there, you need that comma after the phrase after school. It would be weird if that comma weren't there. After school, Mindy has to go straight to the band practice. No, after school, Mindy has to go straight to band practice. Okay? So those are the typical ways to use the comma in a sentence. So let's take a look at our first example. And I know a couple people were asking before, whenever we have these ACT practice questions on the screen, if you click on the tab that you see towards the right side that says poll, so you're going to come out of the chat window just for a second, click on the tab that says poll, and if you have an answer for this, go ahead and put your answer down for this, and then go back into the chat so you can interact with us. So let's take a look at this example here. The greater the pressure from the wind causes bonds to form more quickly at the downward edge than in the rest of the snowflake. Okay, so when you look at this sort of sentence, you'll be like, all right, what's being underlined here? What is this question testing me on? What is the topic that they're testing on? If you notice in this example here, well, one thing to notice right away, that comma is part of the underline. So that's in play in terms of, should we include this comma? Should we not include this comma? And I think I'm seeing a lot of you guys even right away saying, you know what? That comma looks kind of weird there, right? If you look at the sentence, the greater the pressure from the wind causes bonds to form more quickly at the downward edge than in the rest of the snowflake. Is that comma absolutely needed there? Like, maybe not, right? So then if you look at those remaining answer choices, well, wait a minute. A lot of those answer choices have different commas in them, right? So it's like, what's the error here? Error is that the error is that comma is in a weird spot. So we can certainly get rid of choice A, right? We know something has to change here. But as we said before, wait a minute, do we even need that comma? If you notice, those other answer choices are actually going to make this sentence maybe a little bit more awkward. So what do we do here? We get rid of the comma, and choice D, as the majority of you put down, is your correct answer. The greater the pressure from the wind causes bonds to form more quickly at the downward edge than in the rest of the snowflake. And Deanna, right, that's one of the things you probably noticed, like, oh my gosh, there are commas everywhere. The comma in the sentence that seems like a weird spot, commas in the answer choices that seem like weird spots there. So don't overthink this. Don't say to yourself, the more commas, the better. right? Don't think in those terms. Just think of the way to break down the sentence as neatly as possible. Great work here, folks. Again, let us know if you do have any questions. Keep bringing them up into the chat on the right side of your screen. Let's take a look at one more topic that comes up, comes up quite often on the ACT English test, and that is this topic of subject-verb agreement. Subject-verb agreement. And yes, Matthew, I think I've seen like T-shirts or like internet memes that have that, right? Let's eat, comma, grandma. Like you're telling grandma, hey, let's eat together, right? If the comma's not there, it says, let's eat grandma, which sounds really morbid. So Matthew, thanks for refreshing my memory on that. That's a fantastic example that you just gave about the importance of when to have commas. So that's clearly an example where we should have a comma, especially if we love grandma. All right, subject-verb agreement, everybody. So this next topic we're going to look at deals with how subjects and verbs have to match in terms of person. First person, second person, third person. So for instance, I am playing golf. You are playing golf. They are playing golf. First person, second person, third person. If you've taken any of like sort of and this is the ACT English test, but even for those of you who've taken like foreign languages, for instance, the Latin languages, Spanish, French, Portuguese, you might know some of the verb tenses, right? I took Spanish in high school, so I remember like yo and tu and usted and ellos and ellas, right? Like all those, all those things to indicate first person, second person, third person. So same thing here. You want to make sure that the subject and the verb match in terms of the person, and also that they match in number as well. Singular subject, singular verb. Plural subject, plural verb. So for instance, she works, whereas they work. And this is actually, as a little bit of a side note, this is actually can be one of the more frustrating things about the English language. If you notice, the singular verb here in this example is the word works that has an S. The plural verb here is work, which has no S, right? So just be careful about things like that. When you have a singular subject, you need a singular verb. When you have a plural subject, you need a plural verb. Let's take a look at this one together, folks. And once again, we're going to open up that poll that you see. Go ahead and click on the tab that says poll, and then you can go through the sentence on your own if you think you have an answer. If you're not sure, if you're not completely sure, I don't want you to put down any answer just for the sake of it. Let's go through this question together. According to geologists, a fossil fuel deposit truly game-changing size. Whether a giant pocket of natural gas trapped within a shale formation or enormous reservoir of crude oil deep beneath the ocean waves have become increasingly difficult to discover, if any even still exist. Notice what's being underlined here, folks, in question number 2. It's the word have. So think to yourself, okay, if the word have is underlined, something to do with verb, right? Something to do with verbs, some rule of verbs, maybe some rule or some sort of format about verbs. Well, notice here, have is a plural verb, right? They have become increasingly difficult to discover. But wait a minute. Go ahead and type in the chat if you notice it. It's the subject of this sentence. What is the subject? What is it that's become increasingly difficult to discover? Wait a minute. Here's where you want to be careful. There are 2 things to just be aware of. A lot of you probably see the word geologists. But isn't that geologists are increasingly difficult to discover? No, geologists are still out there probably doing their work, trying to figure out like the best way to discover oil and all, natural gas deposits. No, the subject here is a fossil fuel deposit, right? It's a fossil fuel deposit that have become increasingly difficult to discover. Wait a minute, something's off here. We got to get rid of the no change. We need, as Matthew mentioned just a few moments ago, it's the deposit that's singular. We need to match that up with a singular verb as well. So how do we notice that subject and verb there? And Quanah mentioned something amazing in the chat. I want to give you a shout out there. One of the more difficult things about this sentence is that all this middle stuff between the hyphens is actually there to distract you a little bit, right? Like, again, this is the way that we write, right? This is the way that people write, even like high level, college, graduate level writing includes these like phrases in the middle, separated by dashes, but it doesn't affect what's the subject and verb. What's the subject and the verb? It's that a fossil fuel deposit, choice C, has become increasingly difficult to discover, if any even still exist, and C, for correct, is your answer here. So when you see that underlined verb, if you see a sentence where like, look, just the verb or the verb form is underlined, I'm going to double check with the subject. Once you see what the subject is, do that double checking with that. And a lot of times it's like, all right, I got an ACT. I see the subject. I'm going to match it up with the proper form of the verb. Hope this has been helpful so far. Thank you so much for the kind words, Matthew, Tyler. I love working with students. I love working with high school students to helping them be successful on the ACT. So certainly, I tend to be very passionate about this stuff. All right, let's take a look at a little bit of a sample of the ACT math test. I'm sure many of you are like, oh, math, really? All right. The ACT math test will always be the second part of the ACT exam. And it is 60 minutes long and has 60 questions. I don't even need to ask you this, but you can probably see those numbers like 60 minutes long, 60 questions. That's only like a minute, right? A minute per question. You're absolutely right. It's only 1 minute per question. Yikes, right? Like, oh my gosh, like even if the questions were like 5 minutes long, I feel like that's not enough time. Some of these ACT math questions, though, feel really challenging. So what's important to realize, especially as you think about time management, as you think about overall problem-solving ability, the ACT math test includes these 8 different what are called reporting categories. 8 different categories, basically, of math questions. And the sooner that you can start preparing for the ACT in these terms, number and quantity, geometry, statistics, functions, modeling, things like that, then the sooner you can say to yourself, all right, maybe someone like Tyler is saying they're like, I'm okay with algebra. I'm feeling good with algebra. It's those darn geometry problems that are really annoying. Or maybe, Isaiah is saying, you know what? I love geometry questions. But probability, I've noticed those are the harder ones. Find your categories quickly. Find the ones that you feel stronger on early, and so that you can work more on the ones that are challenging you, and this will get you to that balance where you can answer 60 questions in 60 minutes. As impossible as that might seem at first, but that is why we prep. That's why we prep for the ACT. Okay? And as always, just like with the English test, we've got lessons that will include every single topic that you could possibly see on the ACT. For tonight, though, we're just going to take a look at a couple of examples here under the category of preparing, under the category of algebra, and that is good old quadratic equations. And we're going to kick this old school. When we to create a quadratic equation, we use that good old acronym of FOIL to multiply out terms together. First, outer, inner, and last. So when you've got these 2 binomial terms, in this case, we've got x plus 2 and x minus 3, to multiply these terms out together. And by the way, if you notice, you might remember something that looks a little bit similar called the distributive property. If FOIL looks intimidating to you, honestly, just think of it as the distributive property. You're taking what's on the outside and simply multiplying by what's on the inside. X times x gives you the x squared. X times -3 gives you x times -3 and 2 times x together will get you the -x. And the last terms, 2 times -3, will give you the -6. So we've multiplied all those terms out to get our good old quadratic expression there. Now the reverse of that, if you have the quadratic equation and you want to find what the factors are, use reverse FOIL. So let's see this example here. X squared plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. So the easy part is always the first part, right? What two things do you multiply together to get x squared? Oh, gee, that wasn't too hard. It's just x and x. So you can literally fill those in, right? X times x, I'll get you the x squared. So fill that in first. And then here's what you want to do. To figure out what the numbers are that go in those parentheses, ask yourself this. What two numbers add up together to get the middle number and multiply together to get the last number? Go ahead and type in chat if you have it. What two numbers? And where you want to be careful, sometimes when you got negative signs, it can be a little bit more difficult because then you have to consider maybe a positive number and a negative number. I think this example is a little bit more straightforward. Well, what two numbers will add together to get the middle number and multiply together to get the last number or the number at the end? And if you said, yeah, Arthur, I think it's 2 and 3, you're absolutely right. So those are your factors, x plus 2 and x plus 3. Those would be the factors of this quadratic equation. Let's take a look at this question here. Once again, we're going to open up the poll. Go ahead and click the tab that says poll for question number, for this question here. What is the sum of the two solutions for x in this quadratic equation? X squared plus x minus 56 is equal to 0. Okay? So we see this and we're like, okay, that's something to the solutions for x. So in order to know the solutions for a quadratic equation, our first step is going to be to set up that reverse FOIL so that we can solve for x. So here's our quadratic. X squared plus x minus 56 is equal to 0. Just one extra note here. Always make sure that it's set equal to 0. If it's not set equal to 0, move everything over to the other side. So if everything's on the left, everything is on the left side, and you've got equals 0 just on the right side. Okay? So once you have this, x squared plus x minus 56 is equal to 0. Well, let's play the game, right? How do we factor this thing? Well, by using reverse FOIL, we know the two things that get the x squared are going to be x and x. But the other numbers, what two numbers? And go ahead and type it into chat. What two numbers add up to get the middle number? In this case, notice the middle number is plus 1, right? There's no coefficient in front of the x, so it's just going to be 1. What two numbers add up together to get positive 1 and multiply together to get negative 56? What two numbers add up together to get positive 1 and multiply together to get negative 56? And it's going to be, and quantum, I believe, first one up, very nicely done, x minus 7 and x plus 8 is equal to 0. So far, so good. Now, here's where you want to be careful. That gives us our factors, right? Olga also just mentioned negative 7, positive 8. Awesome. I'm seeing a lot of responses here. Negative 7, positive 8. That gives us our factors. But we need to know what x is. And here's why. And so here's how we find what x is. It's so important to set this equal to 0 because when you're multiplying two things together, when you multiply two things together and the result is 0, what has to be true about one of those things? How do you get two things together to multiply to 0? You need at least one of those things to be 0. So if you look at these two factors, I'm going to split them up. Well, if x minus 7 is a factor, what does x have to be in order to get a result of 0? It would have to be 7. And if x plus 8 is a factor that leads to a result of 0, what does x have to be? Negative 8. So our answers for x, and this is where you want to be careful, right? Our answers for x are going to be positive 7 and negative 8. But are we done? Wait a minute. What's this question asking for? It's asking for the sum of the two solutions. So what do we do with this positive 7 and this negative 8? Well, if these are our two solutions, we're going to add them up. 7 plus negative 8 is equal to negative 1, which is choice C. Now, I saw a lot of people initially put down choice D, and choice D is the is a wrong answer, because what happens is a lot of people see the -7 over here and the +8 over here, and they add up those numbers. This is a safe place, guys. So if you're like, yeah, Arthur, that's the mistake I made, go ahead, that's fine. Let us know so that we can correct any mistakes, any other mistakes you might have made. But that's the typical mistake that a lot of people make to get choice D of 1. The correct answer, though, is that since x is either +7 or -8, adding them up together gets you -1. So nicely done to those of you who put down C, -1 as your answer. All right, let's take a look at one more topic in the math on the ACT math test, and this deals with geometry and specifically triangles. A couple basic things to always remember about triangles, okay? And by the way, Deanna, those of you like, oh, they got me with this one. Don't worry. Why are we here tonight? So that honestly, if you make mistakes here, it's just like it's a learning experience, right? I would rather you try the question and get it wrong here than just be like, I'm just gonna put down something. Oh, I got it right, great. Right? Because then it's like, did you learn something from that mistake? Did you learn something from that experience? You're more likely to learn from your mistakes, so that when you go in and take the real ACT, the real exam, you're just that much less likely to make that same mistake. So nothing but positive vibes, hopefully, for all of you out there. Okay? So triangles, everybody. A couple things to remember about triangles. Angles in a triangle always add up to 180 degrees. If it does not add up to 180 degrees, guess what? It is not a triangle. Okay? So we got a three-sided figure, closed three-sided figure will always add up to 180 degrees. Now, another thing to remember is that the area formula. The area is the space that makes up the triangle. Okay? And in order to know the area of a triangle, well, it's by this nice little formula. Area is equal to 1/2 times the base times the height. Okay? You might also remember this good old formula, the Pythagorean theorem. Oh gosh, that dude Pythagoras, he had so much time on his hands that he just like dedicated his whole life to write this theorem. Right? The Pythagorean theorem states that states a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. I want to just add this note here. You can jot this down. The Pythagorean theorem works for all right triangles and only right triangles. If you don't have a right triangle in the drawing or in your sketch, do not use Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem is applicable for any right triangle, also only for right triangles. Don't try to use Pythagorean theorem for some rando triangle. Okay? All right. So again, A and B are the legs, and C is the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the side opposite the 90-degree angle. And one of the things that you always want to be looking for when you see triangles, especially right triangles, right, is the 3, 4, 5, the 5, 12, 13, what are called special right triangles. If you can remember these ratios, this actually saves you a little bit of time on test day, rather than going to your calculator like, oh gosh, 5 squared, 25, plus 12 squared, 144, 25 plus 144 equals 169, square root of 169 is 13. No. If you see, well, one side's 5, one side's 12, oh, the other side's 13. It's one of those specific formats. Like two sides are like 5 and 13. If like one side was 5 and the hypotenuse was 13, save yourself some time and be like, look, I know the other side's going to be 12. Or let's say a multiple of one of these special right triangles. Let's say one of the sides was 40 and the hypotenuse was 50. Oh, wait a minute. It's one of those multiples of these, right? If one side is 40 and the hypotenuse is 50, don't go rushing to your calculator and be like, 50 squared, 2,500 minus 40 squared, which is 1,600. 2,500 minus 1,600 is 900. Square root of 900 is 30. Guess what? You can do that. Or you could save yourself a good 10 to 15 seconds of that calculation time and be like, look, I got my answer even quicker. So always be on the lookout for those 3, 4, 5 and those 5, 12, 13 triangles. Let's take a look at an example of a geometry question. Once again, we're going to open up the poll here for question number 4. Go ahead and click on the tab that says poll. And when you have an answer, go ahead and put it into the poll. What is the degree measure of the smallest interior angle triangle DEF below? Okay, so we're given these three angles, right? 4x plus 16. 2x plus 15, x plus 2. We're given these three angles in a triangle. So first thing is like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, triangles, right? The three angles there, got a whole bunch of x's. Well, what do we know about all these three angles? They've all got to add up to 180 degrees. So we can set up our equation, right? X plus 2, 2x plus 15, 4x plus 16 is equal to 180. And then we follow the regular rules of algebra. This is, again, old school math. This is not even high school math for a lot of you, right? This is like junior high school math, I think, for some of you guys, right? If we add up the like terms, get rid of the parentheses, add up the like terms. So we add up the x and the 2x and the 4x. And after that, we add up the constants, the 2, the 15, the 16. We add all those up. We got 7x plus 33 is equal to 180 degrees. And of course, again, following the regular rules of algebra. In order to get what x is, we're going to subtract 33 on both sides. That gives us 7x is equal to 147. And therefore, last step, divide by 7. X is equal to 21. Are we done? Are we done? Look at choice A hanging out there, being all casual, 21, sitting there like, yeah, I did the math. I got x is equal to 21. Is that what the question's asking for? Is the question asked you for what x is? Be careful. We know that that is not what the question itself is asking for. The question is asking you for what? It's asking for the measure of the smallest interior angle. So it's going to be one of these three angles here, right? Going back to our original diagram. This one, or this one. So here's where a lot of people spend a lot more time than they need to for something like this. They plug in the x, right? 21 into angle D, angle E, angle F. And then once they get the value for each three of those angles, it's like, okay, I know which one's the smallest one. I have my answer. But look at the way they've set up these angles. The ACT is actually trying to help you here, believe it or not. I know sometimes we think of the ACT as using a lot of trickery, or I like to use the word trickeration, but not really here. If you look really carefully here, wait a minute. The smallest angle, I'm comparing x plus 2, 2x plus 15, 4x plus 16. Which of these angles is going to be the smallest? It's going to be this one. It's going to be x plus 2. So forget what those other values are. Forget plugging those numbers into those other angles. All we care about is angle E. Well, x plus 2, I think I can do that, right? 21 plus 2 is equal to 23. And choice B for boom is your correct answer here. That's the measure of the smallest interior angle. Again, a lot of you, I think the first time you're looking at this problem, you might have plugged in x into each of those three angles because you're just like, just in case, right? Just in case. But when you see those setup of those angles and you can say, look, E's got to be the smallest because E has just the variable of x and all those others are multiplying that number and adding something to it. Of course, E is going to be the smallest. Just plug it in for that angle. Great work on this, folks. Let's take a look. So that was our quick little look at the ACT math test. Hope this has been helpful so far. Again, keep posting questions, comments into the chat on the right side of the screen. Let's take a look, though, now at the reading test on the ACT. So when you're sitting there, to take the real ACT, after the math test, you get a short break of about 10 minutes or so. And then after that, the third section will be the reading test. It will be 35 minutes long and consist of 40 questions distributed over 4 passages. So this means, if you do the math, just under 9 minutes. If you're really picky, if you're really good with, if you're good with math, you might be like, yeah, Arthur, that's 8.75 minutes per passage. 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Don't time yourself exactly 8 minutes and 45 seconds, but you get the idea, right? A little bit under 9 minutes for each passage, and each passage has 10 questions. So yeah, you've got to read efficiently. You've got to read aggressively in order to do well on these passages. But you don't need to read for memorization. When we see an example in just a little bit, we're going to take a look at how to read most effectively. So Tim, I'm with you. Honestly, when I was studying for the ACT, I was with you on that. Like, I hate reading. Olga is saying, I can't read that fast. Help, right? That's in the big capital letters. But we're going to take a look at the most effective ways to read these passages. Okay? But just a little bit of background before we get into that. The reading test contains passages from different topics: social studies, humanities, natural science, literary narratives, but the same reading techniques apply to every type of passage. So here's the thing. Some of you guys might be thinking to yourselves, oh, it's not I like social studies, it's the science passage I really hate. Or you might be thinking the reverse. You might be like, oh, I'm really good at natural science, but the humanities ones, I don't like those, right? Regardless of the topic of the passage, you read the same way, because the ACT reading is testing just a couple of core ideas. One, do you fully understand what the author's main idea is for a passage? Then, are you able to find the most important details? Not every detail, because think about the last time you read something for like a history class, as an example, right? When you're reading something for history class, you had to memorize all the countries that were involved in this conflict, who the leaders were, what treaty agreement was, all the super specific stuff. You had to memorize everything. You had to cram it in your head. You had to take the test. You had to take that history test. And what happened? Literally, maybe an hour after you took the test, you just forgot everything. I've been there. I've done that a lot. I did that a lot. But the ACT reading test is not about trying to memorize every single thing, but how do you find those most important details? That's where, to Tim and to Olga, to your points earlier, you don't have to read the way you normally read for school, as weird as this might sound. You read to get main ideas. You read to get the most important points. You read to make inferences. Or another way of saying this is, why? Not what is this passage about, but why did the author mention this? Why did the author include this? Why is the author talking so much about this? It's, the author's adding emphasis. The author's making an argument. The author is really showing how much he loves plan A over plan B. Whatever the main point is, you don't care about the details, you care about the main point, and if you're able to make inferences about that. Okay? Also, simply to analyze the author's voice, the author's methods, okay? In terms of just understanding, like, what position is the author taking? You can get that through a quicker reading of the passage, okay? You can definitely do that, all right? Thanks for the kind words, Aaron, Brevin. Thanks so much. Let's take a look at a couple of things. I'm thrown off by the compliments, but thank you anyway. The big picture versus the finer points on an ACT reading passage. So reading on the ACT, and honestly reading in college, right? It's not just on the ACT, but reading in college is basically just saying, can you take all this massive amount of information and bring it down to a main point? You can do that when you're reading a passage. Honestly, you've got most of the passage already, and you're ready to answer those questions. So note a couple things. Note the overall topic, the purpose, the main idea while you're reading. That's when you're able to answer those questions, okay? And also to be able to make inferences that are not explicitly stated in the passage. So for instance, if I were to tell you, and this is actually an example I use in my classes, I'm going to give you a little bit of bonus material here tonight, folks. If I were to tell you that I keep 5 cats in my apartment in New York City, my small New York City apartment. I keep 5 cats there. And the first thing I do when I wake up is that I clean out their litter box, and then I give them, then I change their water bowl. So like I put fresh water in there. I give them a new can of cat food. And when I come back later in the day from work, I stop by the pet store. I pick up some cat food. I look to see if there's any cool cat toys. I get home, I brush their hair, I clean them up. The reasonable inference you can make is that Arthur likes his cats. You may go a little bit further and say Arthur's crazy cat man, but we won't go there, everybody. right? But the main point you can get is like, Arthur's really cool with his cats. He really loves his cats. That's an inference. Did I explicitly say I love my cats? No. But the information in the passage can lead you to that reasonable inference. Now, an unreasonable inference would be something like Arthur hates dogs. Oh, wait a minute. Do you know that for sure? Maybe I like dogs, I'm just allergic to them. Maybe I had a traumatic experience with a dog, and so I don't hate dogs, I'm just scared of them. That's where inferences are. Okay, that's what inferences are. Be able to make conclusions based on information in a passage. So let's take a look at this paragraph. I'm actually going to give you a few seconds. I'm going to stay quiet actually for just about 20 seconds. I want you to read this paragraph on your own and see if you can distill it down to just one main point. Once you have it, maybe you see the main point even as you're reading, go ahead and type it. I'm going to stay quiet for about 20 seconds. You can do this, folks. Go ahead and type out the main point of this paragraph. All right. Were you able to get at least just the main point? You might even notice the main point is actually part of the introduction. You don't have to literally raise your hand, but if I were standing in front of you, I'd be like, raise your hand if you tend to ignore the introduction. And I'm going to take a wild guess and say a lot of you guys might ignore the introduction. The introduction actually gives us a little bit of information to work with, right? Something about handedness in vertebrates. And as we quickly skim through the passage, you might notice, yeah, they're talking about how like human beings, most of those human beings are right-handed. So like, oh, maybe they're something to do with the motor functions on the left side. But then later on, they're saying something about the humans and contrasting that with animals in terms of their handedness. So I'm seeing a lot of comments coming. Humans are unique compared to animals, human traits specifically about whether they are right-handed or left-handed. So Isaiah, that was a great summary. The hemispheres in the brain separate, they have separate functions, and we're seeing the contrast here, right? Notice one big phrase right at the beginning, right? In the past. When you see this phrase at the beginning of a passage, like in the past, blah, 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 then it almost makes sense that they're going to eventually then talk about what? If they're starting a paragraph with in the past, we've noticed this and this and this. Well, then what do you suppose is going to come up later in that paragraph or later in that passage? Oh, maybe today we're noticing something different. Maybe today we realize we were wrong about what happened back then. So that phrase in the past, they felt only humans have this separated brain thing. Well, now maybe they suspect other animals do too. So what you're doing here is not reading for every single detail, but simply looking ahead where the author is going with all this, keeping in mind the major topic here. Humans tend to be right-handed, and now we're wondering if animals are too. If you jotted this down in your notes for a passage, and we do highly recommend this when you're looking at a passage on the ACT reading test, like in just a few short words, jot down like what the main point is of that paragraph, or maybe the one or two main points in a sentence, so that instead of having to go back and like, oh, what did they say then? 90% of all human beings are right. No, it's just like, okay, most human beings are right-handed. And now they're trying to figure out if animals also have this thing where like they're left-brained, so they're right-handed. They're trying to figure that out. Take a look at the next paragraph. I'll give you, again, about 20 seconds. See if you can come up with, again, the major point that they're trying to make here. Remember how paragraph 1 ended with, hey, we're wondering if animals are like this too. Tell me what you notice in paragraph 2. I'll stay quiet for about 25 seconds. Okay, so if you notice here in this paragraph, and by the way, I should have mentioned this before, you can enlarge the screen if it's a little hard to read on the screen. But if you notice here, we're talking a lot about how the left brain right-handedness is everywhere. But wait a minute, humans seem to be more of this like left brain right-handed thing going on. So it's not just genetics. There's other stuff happening. What's that other stuff that's happening? Notice the author mentions things like the use of tools, the continued reliance on fine motor skills for the everyday tasks of humans. So human beings, not just, so notice, oh yeah, Matthew noticed like genetics plays a role in our handedness, right? So a lot of things to do with genes, but Erin also noticed animals don't have a preference like humans do. Humans somehow have this preference because human beings are surrounded by this stuff. I don't know, to the 10% of you guys who are left-handed, honestly, I sympathize with you guys because, like, when's the last time you saw, like, left-handed scissors, right? Like, everything feels like it's for right-handed people, right? Left-handed people, the struggle is real, right? So what the author's noticing here is, again, going back to a great summary that Erin gave us before, humans have some sort of preference, or it's like built in us beyond genetics, right? Beyond genetics, like there's other things going on here. So if you had a quick summary here, yeah, a lot more evidence that human beings are, a lot more evidence that's piling up here. But notice, humans are more right-handed, not just because of their genes, not just because of genetics, but also the fact that they've just become so used to doing stuff that's meant for right-handed people. One of our Kaplan teachers actually here tonight, Greg, mentioned that he is a left-handed person. So Greg, I sympathize with you, and I will, next time I see you, I'll try to buy you a pair of left-handed scissors. All right, so we see here the main points that are being brought up here, right? Human beings tend to be a little bit more right-handed, and the author's wondering why, and say, yeah, animals tend to be a little bit more right-handed than left-handed, but human beings way more. Let's take a look at a couple of questions. Take a look at number 5. The main point of the passage. Main point of the passage. Go ahead and type it in, put your answer into the poll. Take a look at those choices, and if you have an answer, put it into the poll. But let's really think about this overall. The main point, keep it general. Don't get too much into the specifics here. You'll probably notice some of these answer choices are very specific. Some of these answer choices may even include words or phrases that you remember reading in the passage. But is it the main point here? What was the main point here? To try to understand something to do with how the hemispheres of the brain and how the left brain people, that's where the motor skills are. So therefore, it accounts for like more people being right-handed. So which of those choices, and if you need to, honestly, if you do need to, at least eliminate choices. I think some answer choices probably look a little bit weird. You can probably get rid of some of those answer choices. But out of those answer choices, which of those choices is key, is the main point of the passage. Because on the ACT reading test, for every passage, you're going to see at least one or two of these questions that are about the main point. If you had choice B, which I believe a little bit less than half of you had down, choice B is your correct answer. The specialization of the hemispheres of the brain has a complex origin. Again, going back to our main point, right, that we saw very early on, how people are, motor skills on the left side of their brain, so they tend to be a little bit more right-handed. Okay? I saw a couple folks here put down choice A. If you look at choice A, notice there's one part of choice A that goes a little bit beyond what was discussed in the passage. Studying handedness is crucial to understanding brain chemistry. Notice how choice A is almost flipping this a little bit, right? Like choice A is saying that the passage, the most important thing to understand is brain chemistry. That's not what this passage is saying. This passage is saying, hey, from our studies about brain chemistry or brain motor skills and things like that, we're learning stuff about handedness. So if you see that choice A is actually a little bit of a flip there, like almost like saying, choice A is saying, this is important because of this, when really it's the other way. Okay? And let's take a look at one more question. Take a look at number 6. It can be inferred from the passage that no species has ever displayed what. And I know this is going to be a little bit tough if you don't, obviously, if you don't see the passage in front of you, we'll obviously tell you, go back into the passage and see which of these choices make sense here. But notice it says it can be inferred. So again, not something that's directly stated, but it still must be true. If you remember, one of those details that we saw before was that human beings, that 90% of human beings tend to be right-handed. And we also saw that other animals aren't quite so right-handed. Some animals are a little bit more right-handed than others, but no species is more right-handed than human beings. And we saw the reasons why. Because human beings, not just because of genetics, but because of other factors. It's like, yeah, human beings are going to be the most right-handed species out there. So which of those choices is an inference that we can make from the passage? If you look at those choices, some of those choices, again, some of those choices sound really silly. Like, for instance, choice A, no species has ever displayed a preference for left-handedness. No, some species have some left-handedness, right? Never said that they don't. I love choice D, the ability to change handedness. Well, human beings have the ability to change handedness. But notice how the question says, no species has ever displayed what? If you put down choice B, a 95% preference for right-handedness, you would be absolutely correct here. Because human beings are more right-handed than any other species. And if human beings are 90% right-handed, well then, nothing's going to be more than 90%. B is your answer here for this harder question about reading. Okay. So notice, even though first time I go, whoa, this is really specific, go back to the main point. Human beings are super right-handed, more right-handed than anything else out there. So choice B has got to be the answer, because there's no way that there's going to be any other species out there that's more right-handed than human beings. Okay. All right, great work here, folks, on the ACT reading test. Again, just a little sample of what to expect on the ACT reading test, and a sample of teaching that we would give for something like this. Now let's take a look at the fourth and final section for tonight, and that's the science test. The science test, you do the math real quick. 35 minutes long, 7 passages. Yikes. 5 minutes to spend on each passage. Each passage has about 8 questions, so you're looking at 40 questions, 35 minutes. So it's going to be about 8 questions per 40 questions over 7 passages. So that's going to be about 5-6 questions per passage. Okay? So again, 35 minutes long, not a lot of time, but here's something that might be a little bit helpful here in terms of ACT science. So you see these topics that are listed out here, right? Biology, chemistry, earth science, space science, physics, all this stuff. And you might be thinking, Arthur, I hated biology. I was a freshman and I really didn't like my science class. My lab partner was so lazy and I had to do all the work for those lab reports and all that stuff. You might be thinking that right now. You might be thinking, Arthur, those chemistry experiments were so boring. I had to measure the displacement when I dropped a rock into like a small glass of water. Like, how much did the water go up? All that stuff, right? You may be thinking that right now. Or, as some of you guys saying, Michael, Max, are saying, I love science. Science is awesome. Well, here's what I want you to think in terms of science. Science on the ACT is not questions like, what part of the frog helps with respiration, or what, how many molecules of carbon do you move over from this complex into another to form dichloroxyas, blah blah blah. I wasn't that good at chemistry. You get the idea. Science on the ACT is not about stoichiometry. It's not even about, was it Avogadro's number, or one of my students called it avocado's number? Was it 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, something like that, right? And the ACT science test is not about that. The ACT science test is about using information in a passage. So in some way, the ACT science test is almost like the reading test, but about science-y stuff. And especially, you see a lot of questions that are about simply this. What was the experiment about? What was the experiment about? Why did they do the experiment? How did they do it? What did they learn? That kind of stuff. So you can take the information in ACT science passage and just boil it down to these couple things. What was the purpose? What was the method? What were the results of an experiment? Also, and we'll see this in a second, examples of how to find information in figures in an ACT science passage. Scanning and interpreting figures to identify those variables and patterns. And thirdly, just good old scientific method. As many of you guys many of you guys might remember, that's like the first thing you learned in high school science class, right? Or junior high school science class, right? Scientific method, or using scientific reasoning, right? All that stuff about like independent variables and dependent variables, or like control and the controls and the variables and things like that, right? So scientific reasoning, scientific method. And so that's what we cover. That's what's covered on the ACT, and that's what we cover in our ACT Kaplan online program. So we're going to take a look at one example of a typical ACT science question that deals with interpreting data. So there are a couple things when you see a chart or a graph. Notice what you want to note are a couple things. One, what does the X and Y axis represent? The X-axis usually is the independent variable. The Y-axis is usually the dependent variable, right? The X is what thing that the scientist or the person who's doing the experiment, what did they change? And then the Y-axis represents what's the thing that resulted from that change. So let's say X and Y-axis. And then also, what kind of X to Y relationship is there, right? So for instance, those of you might, let me jump back a little bit. So some of you might notice, for instance, those of you who are taking chemistry, I always forget which one it is. I think it's Boyle's law, I think, right? Those of you taking chemistry, right? Pressure 1, volume 1 equals pressure 2, volume 2. As pressure goes up, volume goes down. An inverse relationship between the two variables, right? Like things like that sometimes come up, like just not that you have to memorize Boyle's law, thankfully, but simply that you have like, oh, I noticed the relationship between these variables. I notice as one thing goes up, the other thing goes down. Or as one thing goes up, the other thing also goes up. So note the relationships in the variables themselves, okay? And then the units. And Sarita, yes, I love the way you phrased it. The vertical axis, I saw you said that just about a minute ago. The vertical axis depends on the horizontal axis. Therefore, the vertical axis is the dependent variable. That's a great way to actually to memorize that. So thank you for sharing that. So always look for the units in a graph. Like, what does each mark mean? Don't automatically assume that each mark means 1. It might not. Each mark might mean 10. Each mark might be 100. So just note what the tick mark represents. And as I said before, right, do we have a direct relationship or an inverse relationship? Like, so just note the relationship between the variables themselves. Okay? Let's take a look at this question here. We got a lot of information here for one question. So notice, at the beginning of this, they tell us about solid materials, their solubility levels in water at various temperatures. And if you see that figure there, oh, here are different substances. We got sugar, we got KNO3, we got NaNO3, we got NABr, KBr, KCl, Na2SO4, C2SO4,3. We got all these different chemical compounds here. Figure 1 shows the grams of solutes for various chemical compounds in a saturated solution with 100 grams of water solvent at temperatures between 0 and 100. Again, notice first the tick marks, right? Notice the X and Y axis and what each mark represents. So in our X axis, we've got the temperature going from 0 to 100, and our Y axis, the solubility. And solubility is defined here. They give us this equation. Solubility is grams of solute versus grams of solvents. All right, well, what's the trend? What's the overall thing we're noticing here? So our variables, temperature and solubility, our units, degrees, and grams of solute. And go ahead and type this into the chat. What's the trend that you notice here with temperature and solubility with these chemicals, with these chemical compounds? What do you notice is the general trend here? And bonus points, if you notice that trend isn't 100% consistent. But do you notice what the trend is? And you might look back, yeah, it looks upward, right? Like everything. The hotter it gets, the higher the temperature gets, the solubility goes up, right? For most of them, not all of them, right? There are a couple where it actually goes down. So Alice, yeah, mostly upward. There are a couple of exceptions. If you notice, I think it's Na2SO4 goes down a little bit. Ce2SO43 goes down a little bit. For the most part, it's a direct relationship, as Dave and Allison mentioned there. It increases a direct relationship, but we do see a couple examples where it decreases. So let's take a look at one of the questions that you would see for this sort of passage. I'm going to open up that poll one more time. Take a look at question number 7. Approximately how many grams of NaNO3 could be dissolved in 25 grams of H2O at 90 degrees Celsius? Go ahead and put your answer into the poll for this one. Well, something to do with NaNO3. So let's see where our NaNO3 is. Oh, it's right here. It's right there, right? And they're asking us about 90 degrees. Well, I see the 90 degrees here. See the 90 degrees in our temperature scale on the x-axis. So it looks like that 90 degrees is going to be right about here, right there, right? That would be between 80 and 100. So the next step is, well, what's the solubility? Solubility, if you look all the way back, if you look back towards the y-axis, oh yeah, it's 160. Oh, wait a minute. 160 is one of our answer choices. What's the question asking you for, though? Did you notice this? The question's asking for how many grams could be dissolved in 25 grams of H2O. What is our y-axis in this chart? Our y-axis in this chart is our solubility, which is defined as per 100 grams of H2O. So the solubility would be 160 if you had 100 grams of water. But the question's asking us, what would the solubility be if you only had 25 grams of water? Well, what do you do with that 160? You've got to divide it by 4. To get it down from 100 grams of water to 25 grams of water, divide by 4. 160 divided by 4 is going to give us choice B, 40 grams of water as your correct answer for this one. Be careful, folks. That's the hard part of this question. Because remember, it's 100 grams of water on the y-axis, but the question is asking us about 25 grams of water. So that's why we take that 160 and we divide it by 4. Brevin, I love the attitude. You're just like, you know what? I'll get it next time. I will rock this next time so that I won't fall for this. I won't fall for this mistake again. And the best way to always make sure that you're not gonna make these same mistakes, to give yourself a better test score, to give yourself a better ACT score. And let's face it, guys, why are we all taking the ACT? Go ahead, type it in the chat. I want to see your honest answers to this. Why are we taking the ACT? ACT is fun. I like science. I love math. No, why are we taking the ACT? To go to those colleges and be like, yo, you should take me, you should accept me to your school. Here's my ACT score. Boom, mic drop. All right. That's why we study for the ACT. That's why we want to get the best score possible. So as Brevin, as you said before, get them next time. But be prepared. Be prepared for all the ways that you will see questions on the ACT. Be prepared for all the best ways to answer those questions to show college readiness, because that's what the ACT is all about, showing how ready you are for colleges. Okay? Someone was asking before, like, does Arthur teach a lot of this? Or I wish Arthur was my teacher, which always makes me a little self-conscious. But I will say this: I am one of the select few teachers, and again, we're joined by so many wonderful ACT instructors tonight. I'm very glad to be one of the chosen few who are part of our ACT Kaplan Online Prep Live program. So this is an exclusive program that we have through Kaplan and the ACT, so that with this ACT Kaplan Online Prep Live program, you get access to official ACT practice questions. Like all the questions that we saw tonight are approved and have been done before by the ACT. So this is like as legit as it gets, okay? So official ACT practice. You get this live instruction. This is all live, like just how all of you guys are asking questions and participating in our polls and being able to get specific feedback on the things that you need feedback on. So we have live instruction. We also record all of our lessons through on-demand instruction as well. You do get, again, a personalized study plan that's just like, hey, what do I need to do to get my ACT score higher, right? Not what do people need in general. People need in general to study more. Great, Arthur. That didn't tell me a lot. I already knew I need to study. But the ACT Kaplan Online Prep Live study plan tells you exactly what you need to study next to get a higher score, okay? And Kaplan's best and brightest ACT experts, and me, they think I'm a bright ACT expert. But again, like I said, I have so much respect for our teachers in the room tonight. Again, Greg, Beth, Crystal, Rob, like all these, Joe, all these wonderful folks here, who are part of our ACT Kaplan Online. And one of the nice things about our program in particular is that this program, if you register for the ACT exam and you qualify for a fee waiver, so if you're able to take the ACT for free because you qualify for a fee waiver, you actually can get this program for free as well. Even if you can't get this program for free as well, we'll show you some ways that you can purchase this program. And again, it's a pretty low cost program compared to some of the other programs out there. But we really believe that we want to make preparation for the ACT as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So you have over 2,400 practice questions, 2 full-length tests, and 4 what we call short-form tests. Short-form tests are basically like, if you're thinking to yourself, yo, I got no time to take an entire ACT practice test. I've got real life. I've got school. I've got track. I've got volleyball. I've got debate team, whatever it is. You can also practice through our short form ACT diagnostics test as well as our ACT digital flashcards, 28 hours of instruction about everything that you need for the ACT. We've got classes literally going every night, pretty much every weekend, and it's really helpful to get you all the preparation you need. And in addition, we have instruction on life skills such as goal setting, time management, test anxiety, and all that. And again, in our study plans, again, performance on your ACT practice test give you a little bit of an extra edge in terms of what you need to do next. So as much as you felt tonight was helpful, really think about how you're going to prepare from tonight leading up to your ACT exam. And that's where hopefully our online prep live program can be most effective for you. So again, our top experts are on-camera and off-camera teachers for every class session. All of our class sessions are basically about an hour, no more than an hour and a half long. Like we don't have like these like weekend, like all day study sessions, like, because we know, again, we want you to get as much possible without feeling burnout, without feeling like stress and all those things that can take away from your study. Okay? So a couple things just to note here as we wrap up for tonight. So when you register to take the ACT, you can also add on online prep live. You don't have to register for a new ACT exam, thank goodness, right? You don't have to take another test again just to get online prep live. If you already have what's called ACT online prep, which is basically just practice questions and things like that, you can upgrade from online prep to online prep live, which will include all the classroom instruction, all the online classes, all the video recordings of all of our online classes as well. And so just so you know, the online prep live program is done by a subscription, so a 6-week subscription. So if you're going to take the ACT fairly soon, maybe you're just thinking, you know what, I'm just going to take the ACT once, and the cost is listed there about $99.95. Now, a normal charge for a 12-week subscription, this actually might be a really good option if you are thinking about taking the ACT multiple times. If you're like, I'm going to take the test, I'm going to take the test in April, and I'm going to take the test in June as well. So you may want to consider the 12-week subscription, which normally is $179.95, but we are doing a little special event here tonight. So if you register for the Online Prep Live program, please use this promotional code that says event. If you type that into event, you'll actually get a 20% discount on a 12-week subscription. And if you think about 24-week subscription, especially those of you who are maybe like sophomores right now, you're thinking like I'm probably going to take the ACT a couple of times. The normal cost is $249.95. But again, if you use the code EVENT when you're signing up, you'll get a 25% discount. So it's a good chunk of change. You're able to save a good deal of money. Okay? So again, Online Prep Live is on sale now. If you go to our website onlineprep.act.org, you can sign up for Online Prep Live there through the ACT website. And if you're already registered for Online Prep Live, you can log in and get right into your online recordings and lessons and practice questions. Give yourself the best opportunity possible to study hard for the ACT, to rock the ACT, to hashtag get ready to ACT. And that does it for tonight. We thank you so much for coming. We hope that this has been helpful. We hope this answered any questions that you had. And I hope that this gave you some information about ACT, and more importantly, gave you a real next step. Like, okay, what do I need to do now to really make sure I rock the ACT? And maybe the ACT Kaplan Online Prep Live program might be your key to success on the ACT. It's been our pleasure to be with you all this evening. Thank you all so much again for the kind words. I recently learned what lit means. I didn't know for a long time, just so you guys know I'm not as cool as you think I am. But if this has been lit for you guys, well, then I will take that as a compliment. On behalf of Greg and Beth and Joe and Crystal and Rob and our entire team here at Online Prep Live, again, my name is Arthur. It's been our pleasure to be with you tonight. Please, again, check out the ACT website, act.org, to sign up for Kaplan's Online Prep Live program and get ready to ACT. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Take care, and best of luck to all of you as you continue to study for the ACT on the road to college admissions. Great night, everybody.